Well, fellas, if I'm good for anything, it's a story. This is the wool blanket story. Once upon a time, long time ago, when I was a young man, I was a Boy Scout. We did a lot of camping. Oh boy, did we do a lot of camping. And the gear back then wasn't as good. It wasn't as prevalent. It wasn't just wasn't what we have at hand nowadays. The sleeping bags, they were kind of few and far between, and they weren't as warm as you would think, and the zippers were constantly breaking and snapping, so a lot of us used blankets. If you could snake an old blanket for someplace, it worked. It rolled up tighter, quicker, easier to clean. We used blankets quite a bit. And as time went by, my mother, who was a tenactic and creative, beautiful, beautiful human, would take the blue jeans from my brothers and my father, myself, and we would wear out the legs and the knees, and usually outgrowing, and she would take the sections that weren't just completely wore out and make a blanket. Sounds a little crazy. She would do wonderful, fun things like that. The amount of work to make a denim, we'll get into the wool blanket, to make a denim blanket, queen size, is incredible. So my mother made 2 of these, and the idea was to take, after they were fashioned, batting or quilting in between and put them together. And what she realized was this thing weighed so much, and be able to do all the work of sewing these 2 together was daunting. So she paused on it, and while she paused on it, I got my hands on it and never gave it back. This became my camping blanket. As a kid, I loved it. It was heavy. It was indestructible. It was the camping blanket. And I had a lot of people look at it and say, "What is that? Man, my mother made this. Is incredible." And I loved it. And we camped with this a lot. Well, one time, when I was a scout, we went on a thing called Outpost. And that was a time where you were at summer camp and you would canoe across the lake. And once you got there, you would spend the night under the stars. You weren't supposed to take all your gear. You took a sleeping bag or something to sleep in, a pocket knife and a flashlight, and that was about it. You canoed out there and you slept under the stars. And it forced you to enjoy it. You didn't have snacks, you didn't have a football or a frisbee or anything else. You were out there on your own, you and your group. And we had done that several times over the years, and it was always a good time. And one fateful time, and I think I was probably 16, 17 years old at the time, we got out there, and there were other troops that had done the same thing, small groups here and there, and we got caught in a deluge, downpour, just straight down rain. It soaked everything. We were soaking wet. There was no place to hide from it, and at that time we didn't bring a whole lot of gear. After the storm had passed and we all kind of recovered, and eventually there was a fire built, and a couple of the troop leaders gathered around and stood around this fire, just kind of drying some stuff off. You saw some sticks sticking up with socks hanging on them and different things like that, trying to dry out. And between the different troop leaders, people started talking, and it was dark, and there I stood with my trusty old denim blanket. This thing was just about soaking wet, but it even, at that time, buffered the wind. Even though it was wet, it kept the breeze and the wind, the cool night air off of you, and it covered you up. I still was happy. I thought I was just the best. And across this fire, another leader, and to this day I don't know who you are, who you were, and I'd love to shake your hand at this point. But he looked across the fire and he squinted and he pulled out his flashlight and he showed his flashlight on me and he said, "Is that denim?" I said, yeah, it's made out of old blue jeans. Isn't this thing awesome? He said, is that wet? I said, well, yeah, it's not that wet, you know. He was like, you're wearing wet denim. What? That thing is worthless. What are you doing? That's it. And he started chirping. And he started getting into me about why I would ever decide to utilize something like this. And at a certain point, I kind of had enough, and I chirped back, and I gave him the one. And I said, well, what are you wearing? Wait, what is that? A wool blanket? What, that wet dog? Fellas, he's got this old stinky, nasty, wet dog wrapped around him. And this guy stopped, and he said, oh, you don't know. Huh. I'll tell you what. And he came around the other side of the fire beside me. He says, I'm gonna show. Oh, you're gonna, wow, look at this. Take that thing off. Let me show you this. Take that thing off. And he had me drop this to the ground, which I didn't mind too much. I mean, everything was wet. It couldn't have gotten any worse. So there it was, into a pile. And he took a wool blanket from around his shoulders. And he started, well, he'd given me one corner. He said, here, take this. He took one corner and I took the other. And we started ringing and ringing and ringing and ringing and ringing. And my memory is that we wrung 2 gallons of water out of that blanket. And I'm grinning the whole time. You got this stupid thing wrapped around you. You're no better than me. Wrung that thing out. And then he said, go ahead, wrap it around you. Just wrap it around you. There you go. Now then. He proceeded to start addressing everybody around the campfire circle there. He said, it's a natural material. It wicks moisture away from you. It does hold water, but it naturally drains the water down through. The very bottoms will be wet. You can kind of wring those out, but it'll retain heat. It's fire resistant. He goes on and on. He chirps for, I don't know, 2-3 minutes. And then he paused and he said, you're getting warm, aren't you? And I paused. And I thought about it. And I wasn't just out of the wind. I was actually getting warm. And I told him that. I said, well, yeah, I am. Wow, I am getting warm. He said, good job. Give it back. And at that moment, I pulled it off of me. And I handed it back to him. And he wrapped up with it. Shook his cold off. And once I was without that thing that retained the heat around me and the night breeze, and my clothes were damp. Oh, it's cold. So I reached down on the ground and I grabbed that old trusty wet denim blanket and wrapped back up in it. Now, I immediately realized and understood that once I had laid that on the ground, any heat that I had put into that wet denim was gone. And it didn't do anything for me but block the breeze. It took forever for me to get that wet denim warm again. And all it did for the rest of the night was to basically keep the breeze off of me and keep me off the dirt. From that point, I vowed that blanket is awesome. But the very first chance I get, I will own a wool blanket. And this is that one, and it is just been through it. It's pretty thin at this point. But I'm telling you, go to the backyard on a cool fall evening, hose this thing down, wring it out, and wrap it around you, set around fire circle or whatever, sit on a porch, enjoy the sunset, whatever it might be, and sell yourself on it. There's a lot of other things in the world. There's emergency blankets and fleece and things like that. But when it comes right down to it, wow. Just wow. And that follows the story every day. Either learn or teach, and on a good day you do both.